behind home plate and began to roll. For decades, the film sat forgotten in a closet, now recently uncovered and restored. A glimpse of Sandy Koufax on a night that maybe God himself created especially for his own left arm. Batter after batter, Koufax was pitching with mastery, precision, concentration, and a fastball that split the night. With his handheld camera, the Dodgers trainer was capturing history, till there were 2 out in a third, and Bill Bueller ran out of film.
The 9th, 1965. He made the toughest walk of his career, I'm sure, because through 8 innings he has pitched a perfect. It is 9:46 p.m. 2-2 to Harvey Keene. 1 strike away. Sandy into his windup. Here's the pitch. Swung on and missed. A perfect game.
What's going on, sports cards fans? Ray from Philly here. It is Sunday, November 13th, and this here is something that I do every once in a while as a book review. And not only do I collect baseball cards, but I'm an avid baseball historian. I read tons and tons of books that you can see over here. This is my 9th episode. So real quickly, I have to look at the shelves here to go over the list of the books in the first 8 episodes. And the first one I did, Dick Allen, The Life and Times of a Baseball Immortal, written by William Cashadis. Ty Cobb, A Terrible Beauty, written by Charles Learson. 24 Life Stories and Lessons from the Say Hey Kid, written by John Shea. That was my 3rd episode. Satchel, written by Larry Ty. The Cooperstown Casebook by Jay Jaffe. Yogi by John Passat. Baseball Gods and Scandal by Ian Kahanowitz. And the last book I showed was Tom Seaver by Bill Madden. So this is episode number 9. This book took me a very long time to finish, not because there's a lot of pages. It's just usually, in my opinion, no more than 2 months should go by, and even that's long. This took me 5 months to finish. I got this book in May, and I just finished it, and it's called Sandy Koufax, A Lefty's Legacy, written by Jane Levy. The author is Harper Collins, and it's only 241 pages. Life gets in the way. I just got really busy. There was the National. There's just tons of things going on. I finally committed at the end of the summer to finally start finishing this book. And it was a great book. Every book I've written so far, I'd have to say was a great book. So I've written some notes down from the book as I was going along reading it. Koufax's career, of course, was a short one. It was from 1955 to 1966. Jane Levy is a pretty popular author of baseball books. She's written 2 other books, one on Mickey Mantle called The Last Boy, and one on Babe Ruth called The Big Fella, which is on my list to read, The Big Fella. So Jane goes on to say that Sandy Koufax was a very honorable, good, human, decent person, not only as a great player, but as a good person. Avoided the stardom, the celebrityness of his career, and even after his career. He was pretty much kept on his own and didn't really do a lot of interviews until this day. Still really doesn't do a lot of interviews. In 1999, was named on the All-Century team. When he was invited, he wouldn't do it unless they invited Warren Spahn, who he recognized as the greatest left-handed pitcher he ever saw. So if you ever watched that game, and I think it's in Boston, Fenway Park at the All-Star game, Koufax helped Spahn out from the dugout because Spahn was very old at that time in 1999, and Koufax helped Spahn out in the field to get acknowledged as well as he should have. Like I said, he did live a very private life. He chose not to live his life in quotes, but rather than he didn't even want to do this book. Jane Levy was saying in this book that it took quite a few years for her and him to get together and for him to do it. But it wasn't going to be on anything personal. It was just going to be, you know, nothing about his ex-wives or anything like that. He was just a straight up person and didn't want to be anything controversial. So kudos to him. About his playing career, she goes on to say that he had enormous hands. I mean, he was bigger than I thought. I always thought he was like a 5'10". He was like 6'2", and he had huge hands, which the ball disappeared on his hand. So it was hard to pick up the ball from batters. They just couldn't pick it up. So he had a lot of rotation, a lot of spin in that ball. But when he first got started, 1955, he gets signed by the Brooklyn Dodgers as something called a bonus baby. Now, back then, if you were signed as a bonus baby, it meant if you were signed, you couldn't be sent down. There was a pitcher on the Dodgers at that time that wasn't signed as a bonus baby, so to make room for Koufax, they had to send this pitcher down, and that pitcher was Tommy Lasorda, of all people. So Tom always brought up that story in his life whenever he was talking about Koufax, how he was the guy. If it wasn't for him, Koufax wouldn't be Koufax. So they had to send Lasorda down to make room because Koufax was signed as a bonus baby. But Koufax really was better in basketball. He played as a walk-on for basketball at the University of Cincinnati. He was a better basketball player than he was a baseball player. So he was a walk-on at college at the University of Cincinnati, playing basketball for them. What he was really known for was this holdout at the end of the 1965 season with him and fellow teammate and fellow great and fellow Hall of Famer Don Drysdale. At the end of the 65 season, they had this holdout where Koufax felt, you know, he should have renegotiated a contract. Well, Buzzy Bavasi, who was the then general manager of the Los Angeles Dodgers, wasn't having anything to do with it. Koufax was ready to retire, so he didn't really care. He was already saying at the end of the 65 season, he knew 66 was his last year. So if they didn't bring him in, he was okay with retiring right there and then. On the other hand, though, Don Drysdale wasn't ready to retire. So if the both of them were on the same page in that aspect, with the two of them, they're losing half their starting rotation. Maybe with the two of them standing together on that, things might have been different. But it wasn't real, and that was the first year in 1965. Marvin Miller was the Players Association leader, and when free agency started in 1966, they always go back to Curt Flood and Sandy Koufax's holdout and Don Drysdale's holdout at the end of the 65 season. It took 10 years after that for that to really be acknowledged, that if it wasn't for guys like Koufax and Drysdale, there wouldn't be free agency going into the 1976 season. But Koufax did retire. He knew at the end of the 65 season that he was going to retire in 66. In the beginning of his career in the 50s, Walter Alston didn't use him on the regular rotation. He wasn't part of the four-man staff. He didn't get 32 starts a year. He would use him as a spot starter, mainly because Koufax, yes, threw extremely, extremely hard, but was wild. The catchers were exhausted catching him in the 50s. They had no idea, and he had no idea where the ball was going to go. Players were getting hit left and right. Catchers were diving for balls. He was just so erratic and so wild. Going into the 61 season, when he was now in Los Angeles, two people changed his career, and that was catcher Norm Sherry and scout Ed Roebuck. Roebuck, who smoked a lot of cigars, took Sandy and Norm Sherry to this bar across the street from spring training going into the 61 season. And he smoked cigars, and he pointed and made a mark with his cigar on the wall and told Sandy to try and hit that spot. Put a pretend baseball in your hand and try and hit that spot. Well, when Sandy goes into his full windup, Ed Roebuck stops him in mid windup and says, "Look where your head is. Your arm's all the way back, your head's all the way back, and your head's way up in the air. Your head's not looking at home plate. Try and keep your head still, and if you want to move your arm back and your back all the way back and bend it, that's fine, but keep your head still in the catcher's glove so you know where the ball's actually going." That changed everything. That and the catcher Norm Sherry at the next day at spring training telling him to take something off the ball. Next thing you know, the first 3 batters, he strikes out the side. Sherry goes back to the dugout and tells Koufax, you actually threw harder taking something off the ball. So by not trying to overthrow and overcompensate, you were actually throwing harder. And now that what Ed Roebuck was telling you to not lift your head off the ball and pull your head off and keep your head on the catcher, you were throwing bullets right down, bullets that no hitter could hit. That's when Koufax became Koufax going into the 61 season. And then the rest is history. But he was such an incredibly hard thrower. And he was only 30 years old, 32, I think, when he retired at the end of the 66 season. And there's this famous interview that you can look up when he's announcing his retirement. And they asked him, what about the loss of income? And his comment was, the loss of income. If there's anybody out there, any man out there that could tell you that they could lose their income to be able to use the use of their left arm for the rest of their life, there isn't no man out there that wouldn't trade that in a second. He went to his trainer that year going into 66, asking him, how much time do you think I have left before I can't be able to button my own shirt? And the trainer said, now. That was the end of that, and Koufax knew that going into 66 was going to be it. And it was amazing that they didn't have the Tommy John surgery till about 8 to 10 years later. Who knows what would have happened to Sandy Koufax if they had the technology in 1966 of Tommy John surgery. He could have pitched 4, 5, 6 more years, would have gotten 3,000 strikeouts, and easily would have gotten 300 wins. But arguably the greatest left-handed pitcher of all time. There's a story where Lou Brock has stated that people used to say Sandy was too much of a nice guy, that, you know, he wasn't a tough guy pitching. And word got back to Koufax, and Lou Brock hit a homer in this one particular game. The next at bat, Koufax nailed him. And the catcher at the time was Torborg. Torborg said that when Sandy hit you, most pitchers, when they would hit a batter, the ball would bounce off of them 10, 15, 20 feet. But the ball didn't bounce off of these batters. It would literally go into their body like a spear and then just drop straight to the ground, which is 10 times worse than it bouncing off of your body. It was like a spear going in your body. So you didn't want to intimidate Koufax whatsoever. People were scared of Bob Gibson, but if you got hit by Koufax, it was worse because it didn't bounce off of you. It went in you, and it just died right in front of you. This book is really around, I mean, it covers his whole career, but it pretty much is surrounded around his 4th no-hitter. He threw 4 no-hitters. It's basically surrounded around his 4th and final no-hitter, which was a perfect game. So every other chapter is kind of going back to, like, the first chapter is part of the beginning of his career. Second chapter is the first inning of that perfect game. Third chapter is another part of his career. Fourth chapter is the second inning, and so forth and so on. So like every other chapter is the next inning of that perfect game. So it's pretty much revolving the story around his perfect game, surrounded by his career, if that's the best way to explain it. The interesting thing about that perfect game was not on TV that night. There's no video recording of that game. Kind of like Wilt Chamberlain's 101 points in 1961. There's no video recording of that game. The story with that is that there was this young fan named Dave Smith who lived in California who was a fan of the Dodgers. His favorite player was Sandy Koufax. Every time Sandy would pitch, he would use a reel-to-reel recorder to record the game. Well, that night, his girlfriend, who he ended up marrying later, it was the night before she was getting ready to go off to college, so he had a choice between seeing her or staying home and recording the Koufax game. He decides to leave and go with her, but he tells his father, you know, he set the recorder on a timer. There was no VCRs, nothing like that, and it was only on KFI radio in Los Angeles. And the radio station that night didn't record it as well. This is the only recording from this kid named Dave Smith. The funny thing about it is he forgot to set the recorder when he left the house. His father walked by the bedroom and noticed that the recorder wasn't set. and it was 1 out in the top of the 2nd inning. So his father went in and pressed record. So there's 7 2/3 innings of audio recording, which this guy would not give up to anybody until 1999. He gave it to Sandy Koufax and gave it to, I think, MLB. And you can hear the recording, which I played at the beginning of this video, Vince Scully calling the last strike. And that's because of this guy. And there's about 1 minute video recording of the trainer Bill Bueller, who recorded behind home plate and ran out of film. So you got maybe 2 or 3 batters in black and white footage of Koufax's perfect game that night. So it's just amazing how stories are revolving around that perfect game in 1965, which was in September against the Chicago Cubs, which was no slack. It was against Banks, Santo, Billy Williams. What's weird about that game is opposing pitcher for the Cubs, Bill Henley, pitched a 1-hitter. So Koufax pitched not only no hitter, he pitched a perfect game, and his opposing pitcher pitched a 1-hitter and gave up 1 run. That was an error by the catcher. So it was just an amazing pitching night that night. So like I said, there's no full video footage of this game, of that perfect game in 65, except for Bill Bueller, the trainer, that you can see, and I might even show some at the end of this, where it's black and white footage. It shows like 2 batters and it's like 15 seconds. And this kid, Dave Smith, who has a reel-to-reel recorder back in 65 and forgot to hit record for the first inning and a half, let's say, and it wasn't for his father pressing the record button. There's 7 2/3 innings of audio recording. So even the radio station didn't record it that night. Just unreal. So there you have it. I highly recommend this book, Sandy Koufax, A Lefty's Legacy. One of, if not the greatest left-hander of all time. I mean, I'm a big Steve Carlton fan, but I acknowledge, to me, like Lefty Grove, Warren Spahn, Koufax, Whitey Ford, and Steve Carlton, to me, are the 5 greatest pitchers of all time. Did I do 6 or 5? Lefty Grove, Whitey Ford, Spahn, Koufax, and Carlton. I mean, Randy Johnson. I mean, you know, it's really close. But Koufax is definitely up there. If he would have had a full career, you know, arguably could have been 2nd, if not 1st. So I recommend this book, Sandy Koufax. The next book I've already ordered on my list. It's about former Phillies pitcher Grover Cleveland Alexander, called The Best Team Over There. That's going to be my next book. And there's no way I'm going to take 5 months to read that book. So there you have it. I appreciate your likes and comments. I hope you enjoy this. Great stories about Koufax. Nothing drama, nothing about personal lives. It's just baseball. I recommend it. 2 thumbs up for me. So I appreciate your likes, guys. Take care. And like I always say, have fun with the hobby. Later.